Today's topic is IT backup strategy, why this should be a top three initiative in any organization. We have a very special guest tonight to help break down the many options and the complexities that come with it. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining back in on the CIO Lifeline podcast, bringing you practical tips and sound advice from the front lines. I'm your host, Tony Darden, and it just wouldn't be the same without my co-host, Tom Dorn. Tom, how are we feeling tonight?
Great, Tony. Excited to be here and exciting for our topic.
Today, I have the privilege of introducing our first guest. His name is Brian Marshall. Brian is a VCIO for Velocity Network based out of Erie, Pennsylvania. And for those that don't know, VCIO is virtual CIO. And he is that person for a variety of companies, ones that just don't have the need for that CIO role as a full-time position and just need some help, whether it's strategy, budget, help desk support. He's kind of a jack of all trades, master of most of them, mind you. We are going to have a targeted topic today around IT backup strategy. I feel like we could have 30 more episodes that involve Brian to round us out. But Brian, I don't want to soak up all your intro time. Why don't you tell our listeners a little more about yourself?
I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal.
That's pretty high standards coming from you, Tony. I appreciate that. Tom, thanks for having me. The virtual CIO thing is kind of different. It's not different to me because I've been a virtual CIO for 15 years now.
I have many leather-bound books, and my apartment smells of rich mahogany.
So it is something that maybe I was one of the first, certainly not the first, but one of the first, is starting to catch on. And just as you said, organizations that, have 20, 30 people, having a real CIO would just make no sense. It doesn't scale to have somebody there. So an organization like that, bringing in a company like mine and having somebody like me be able to set strategy for their IT has never been more important than ever with the changing landscape. And I know the topic today we're going to be talking about is backup. And that's really cool because when we used to talk about backup, we used to talk about backing your data up, and now we talk about it like a security strategy. So really excited for today.
Yeah, we are too. And to your point, we could cover dozens of topics with you, but I appreciate today's focus topic of IT backup strategy because it is an important topic. And it's one that's, I'd like to think a lot of people give time and attention to. But when you think about the volume of data that organizations are collecting and leveraging to run their business day to day, what happens when things go sideways? What happens if you're that next ransomware headline? That's why having a good strategy in place is going to save you and your organization.
Well, Tony, I would just say, when you say the next ransomware headline, and I'm sure, Brian, you must see this with your clients, but the fact is the vast majority of ransomware never gets to a headline, and many customers end up paying just to get back to the ability to run their business.
Right, and it's interesting because we talked about data there, which data is definitely important, and there are plenty of organizations that the data is the holy grail. That's the thing I need. But there's so many businesses that rely on so many automations that are driven by their computers that really it's about getting back to actually being able to do business. Forget about knowing what I did in the past and what data I might have. I literally can't make parts if my computers aren't working. So having a strategy to get that back up and running is super imperative.
Let me just get this disclaimer in because we're going to be talking about strategy. The information provided on today's episode is general in nature. It's not intended to be a blueprint or a backup strategy. We assume no responsibility for the accuracy of information and the protection of data and backups as a result of our discussions.
Couldn't we have just put that in some really fine print at the bottom?
Well, I think we're going to do that also.
Okay.
The lawyers, I'm sure the lawyers would have a third way of getting that injected. In fact, it might be a pop-up on this by the time this thing is produced. Brian, you are exposed to, I'm going to say, hundreds of organizations over your long career. And so when we talk about backup and the importance of it, is there still a segment of the population that are doing the suitcase method where they're just taking turns bringing a tape or an SSD home with them at night? I mean, we still see that
There
today?
unfortunately is a segment that doesn't realize they need to be backing up. So that there is that subset. The group that you just talked about, we call them the trunk slammers, right? They're coming in with their briefcase, taking something, taking it off site. I mean, that honestly, that's even a leap ahead because it's at least out of their building. The number of places that we'll go into that have been in business for years and years and their backup, probably not a tape today, but could be. And I can't tell you the number of times in my, over my time where you go to that tape and you put it in and it's blank. Like every day they've been religiously just swapping the tape out. Nobody's checking them. And I'm sure we'll talk about how important it is to verify your backups. But that's a story that the people watching this podcast will say, I remember when that happened, right? When you go to your
Yeah.
backup tape and that one's blank and so is the next one and so is the next one. And somebody has been very dutifully taking them out, putting them in their briefcase, taking them home, bringing them back and forth. And there's literally nothing on those tapes. So we got a lot of things to try to fix that problem. But you're right. There are people that are coming in and putting it in their car and taking it back and forth. And I will salute that person because at least their backup's not there. You know what backup never gets encrypted is one that's not connected to your network or to the internet. So I'm fine with the fact that that might be happening. Now, it's not great if somebody steals it off your front seat. I always have a line that I say to people. I say, if you have data that rides on your system, your computer, whatever, and it's only one place, then what you're telling me is it's not important to you. It has to
Mm,
exist in more than one location. If it exists in one location, then you are telling the world that I don't care about this. Because it's not a question of
yeah.
if, it's a question of when that piece of hardware fails. Or as Tom said, you become one of those ransomware victims that doesn't make the news. And now you're stuck.
And Brian, let me ask you this because another place that I think I've seen people get into trouble, like that's your data, that's your files, but that's not your OS, right?
Right. So that's a whole different thing, right? What level of backup are we doing? Are we doing machine level backup? So we're backing up the operating system and everything that goes into it. So that's what we call like an image based backup. And then, or are we just getting the data off? Or are we going the old belt and suspenders method and we're doing both? Right? Do I have a great backup of my entire operating system that I know I can boot? And am I grabbing the data and putting it somewhere else so that I know I have both things? And I'll probably use the belt and suspenders a lot of times when we talk today. I apologize, but it is absolutely sort of my backup mantra that if you've got yourself covered in multiple ways, you're not going to be caught with your pants down.
If you're an organization that doesn't have some type of backup strategy, that brings up some questions. Are you just hoping that a large breach or large crash is not going to happen? Because we know hope is not a strategy, right? Maybe you're struggling to get the budget for this. Possible. I mean, after all, um, who we report to may not necessarily fully appreciate just IT in general, or just how important, or they have some wrong assumptions that the data is protected, and if there's a problem, they can pick up the phone and lo and behold, we're back.
That's the one. That's the one. That's 99.95% of them, that's the one. If they don't have a backup strategy, it's because somebody else takes care of the computers for them and they just assume that they must be taking care of it. Because every time I call
Yeah.
Tom, it just works. Every time I call Tony, he just fixes it. That person is going to be surprised to hear that. They're going to just think, well, I mean, what do you mean? Well, I hired this guy, he brought in my computers, like it's not just backing up. And you would ask them, well, where do you think the backup goes? Are you paying someone for where that backup goes? Could you show me an
Yeah.
invoice whereby you think this is getting backed up? And they would have
Yeah.
zero answer to that, but they also are just living with their head in the sand. And sometimes I think it's blissful ignorance, right? They want to be ignorant of it because if I don't think about it, then bad things can't happen. But I do think there's a whole subset of business owners who started a business that didn't really need computers. Minus your pizza shop, which even their point of sale system is likely very heavily computer driven. They probably can still make pizzas and take an order on a piece of paper and figure it out. But beyond that, it's going to be really difficult to run any business if that computer system goes down. We have become so reliant on the computerization of our infrastructure that it's just that type of imperative.
And I think it's beholden on us as leaders to make sure that that is part of your strategy. So if you are challenged by that hope is, that hope, which again, hope is not a strategy, or you are struggling to get the budget for it. I mean, now's the time to be thinking about it.
Brian, have you seen any recent data? The numbers I saw or I'm aware of are older. Like what does a catastrophic failure cost an average business?
I don't have concrete numbers on that, but I will tell you that in a larger business, they usually say a catastrophic event will take between 1 and 2 months of your revenue and flush it down the toilet.
So we're talking about companies that are not buttoned up, right? That they're not prepared for an event like
Right.
this.
Yeah,
Is that
that's where
where
I'm
the two to
saying if
3 months
that's
gonna?
that's where that comes in. If
Okay.
they're unprepared,
Yeah,
or they go out of business completely, because most businesses can't survive that long. But
yeah, that's true.
that lead on that I saw something about the ransom, right? So every ransomware is not the same. They do very good due diligence to figure out right up to the line what you can afford. And then they take it right to that edge so that now you're bleeding for the next 2 or 3 years to try to recover from this giant event. All the cushion that they found in your bank accounts, they've taken away because they know what that line is. Because if they go too far, then you just close, right? I just won't do this anymore because it's not worth it. I have to find that magic number where that is, and they get on your systems to try to figure that out and to figure out what they can or cannot ask for.
And they're so polite. They will give you the keys. They'll stay with you to the bitter end to make sure that everything is recovered and as it was. I mean, they're very generous when it comes
Just
to.
stealing your money.
Customer service is key, Tony.
That's right.
Yeah, so just to double back to the ask, right? It's a lot of what we end up doing as IT people is selling the idea. So I'm not talking about my company is selling it. What I have to do is sell this notion of how important the backup is to the leadership so that they understand why they can't live without it and how we're going to make it happen. We can't go to bed tonight without coming up with a strategy to make sure we're okay, because these are all of the things that not could, but probably will happen if we don't do something.
Yeah, to me, it's not an ROI discussion. And I think the proliferation of ransomware kind of demonstrates here's your value. If you were to get attacked and you had to pay X, or you lose days, weeks, months of revenue, I mean, it should be an easy conversation. But what you said resonated with me. You have that 90+% of companies that just don't realize how complex it is and how involved it is to have the right strategy in place. And it's not free. I mean, there's a cost to
Well, and
this.
let me give you an example because this just happened over this weekend. One of our most vigilant customers. I mean, he does intrusion testing. He hires outside experts to try to hack his system. They are just absolutely as careful as you can be.
Yeah, that's good.
And they got a ransomware attack. And so it took the better part of about 19 hours to get them fully back up. And, people say, "Oh, well, that's not so bad." That was an expensive 19 hours, right? And what could you have done?
Mhm.
And this was with somebody who you use the term they're not buttoned up. I would tell you, I think this guy's pretty well buttoned up.
Well, and we're going to dig into this because the volume of data, the number of systems, and the type of technology that it feeds does play a part in that time. So let's jump to. Then I'm going to throw this to Brian. I'm trying to articulate in my mind what are the standard ways to back up. I mean, you have shadow copies, you have your storage area network, you have cloud. You know, walk us through what help us peel that onion.
Sure. So shadow copies, right? Those are great. We should have them. They live locally. They don't really do us a whole heck of a lot of good if something bad happens outside. There's some rollback strategies with shadow copies for ransomware. Then you've got a lot of locally attached things, okay? So I want to be able to back up my data locally. I think that's great because if I've backed it up locally and I need to recover locally, that's going to be fast. Then we get into our SAN situation where we might be replicating between multiple SANs. Okay, we've just graduated to a much larger enterprise scale business, and we're replicating between these SANs because we're trying to protect, in that case, against hardware failure. Hard drives still die, RAIDs still get corrupted. Bad things happen. Water pipes burst, right? Stuff happens. So we've got to be prepared for the other kinds of things that happen. So replicating between SANs is good. You can have a hot site that you're replicating to. You can be backing up to that local drive and then putting it in the cloud. Okay. And then you can be backing it up locally, putting it in the cloud, and then putting it, sort of getting it segmented in the cloud. We want to make sure that we've got that air gap, as we call it, right? So this backup, this air gapped backup, is a backup that the people that get onto your system can't get, because here's a little secret. If the bad guys get on your system, the first thing they do is they go looking for the backups, and they go try to corrupt all the backups. Once they've corrupted the backups, then they launch their ransomware attack. So we have somebody that only took 19 hours to get it back, and I say only
Right.
because you've got some of these government ones that took 2 weeks, right? And you just wonder what is going on over there. But when you see that 19 hours, that means they got probably to their local backups and they had to pull them down from the cloud in order to restore. But you know what they had were cloud backups that were segmented so they could indeed do that thing. There was a time when I used to just gloat, and it's silly because it lasted like 6 weeks that you could gloat this way, but I used to gloat like, I don't care if my customer gets ransomware, because literally I'll push a button and have it all back. It does not matter. And then the bad guys figured, well, what we're going to do is we're going to steal the data, send it off, right? And then we're going to ransom it. But first, we're going to delete all your backups. So there's all kinds of layers, and that would be 50 other podcasts that we could get into. But the fact is you've got to have it backed up locally where you can get to it quickly. And then we've got to have it in the cloud, and we've got to have it somewhere air gapped.
So 2 questions. Is there a minimum level that all companies, whether you're a doctor's office or you're a billion-dollar manufacturing company, and can you overkill this? I feel like the second one's rhetorical, but I think your belt and suspenders comment and the importance of making sure, especially if you're a billion-dollar company, break that down revenue by day. I almost wonder if you can't overkill it, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so your minimum is just that, right? Your data has to exist in 2 places is the very minimum. And 2 places means both logically, like where it lives on my computer system, and physically. So it has to live, if it's on my server, then it has to live somewhere that's not in that building. That could be another server that's across town. That protects me against, if my building burns down, et cetera. So I'm this doctor's office, I don't want to lose that. Now, that is the bare minimum. That also requires you to put in your own protections to make sure that the people that this backup that replicates across town, that the bad guys can't follow it and get to both, right? We got to make sure that the backup is immutable on site when that happens. So if you have an immutable backup on site and you send it across town, you're going to be fine. My minimum for my customers is you're going to have a device that's going to back it up. It's going to be encrypted. It's non-accessible from the local network, so the bad guys can't get to it. And it also keeps the copies in the cloud. As you get to larger companies, this is where the suspenders come with the belt, right? So now I've got this system that's backing it up locally, sending it off, but I'm using another backup system to back up maybe every hour. So every hour I'm doing sort of a continuous backup, or if I've got SQL backups, I'm doing them every 15 minutes, whatever that is, because I need to understand what and we'll get into these later, but the recovery time objective looks like. I need to understand how quickly do I need to get that data back. So that's where those calculations start pushing in to figuring out how long can you be without your data and how much data are you willing to lose. Those 2 factors determine sort of how we expand and contract that.
So Tom, your organization, are you 90% cloud right now? Like you run your business in the cloud?
Via ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're 100% cloud.
So what does that mean? Like maybe I'm being naive, but I think of, the Microsoft engine. I'm a Microsoft shop. Tom, you're a Microsoft shop. I'm like, I got all my data stored with a company that, has 40 data centers globally, the highest rating, the highest tier, cross pollination, all the backs. Like, should we still be worried as a company if you're 100% in the cloud?
Absolutely. It's as Brian said, it, look, all of these things are mitigation, not elimination strategies. We are mitigating the risk that any one of the things that Brian talked about might happen.
Yeah, and if you read the fine print, like we all do, whenever we have these
That's right. When you click
agreements, we
accept.
always read before we accept and continue. Yeah, but Microsoft will tell you, here's how I interpret it. Yeah, I mean, we back stuff up, but if we end up losing the data, sorry, we did our best. Like, that's scary on some level, even if it's just a fraction of a fraction of a percent chance that there's a problem. I'd like to make sure that this data gets backed up.
Right, which is why we do, right? I mean, we back up the cloud. We don't just hope that Microsoft we trust in Microsoft. We just, we only trust in God, right? We've had with the Microsoft's got to step down. So we're going to use another system to back up our OneDrive, to back up whatever. And Microsoft could make the argument to you that you're opening yourself up to that other company being compromised and your data getting like it's a bigger security hole to be backing it up in a second place. And they probably aren't wrong that there's a chance for data exfiltration in that model, which is why you won't see banks doing that or whatever. They're just trusting in what Microsoft is doing. But in most cases, again, with my belt and suspenders, I'm going to be taking that data and backing it up with another solution because I just want to be sure.
Whether it's an injection molding machine on the production floor, or it could be your HVAC system checking in. Like, there's all this type of data we're trying to collect and potentially report against. And for those that are on the cloud or wish to back up, I mean, this becomes, not only does it become expensive, but it becomes, just gargantuan in terms of size. Is there a math formula or some guidance that says, hey, if I have, keep it simple, 10 terabytes of active data, how many terabytes am I backing up? Because it's not one to one.
Right. Well, it depends, right? It could go either way. If you've got a lot of photos, it could be 2 to 1 the wrong way, right? Because as things come and go. So great example is, we at VNet, we do pole mapping, right? So we have an entire server dedicated to literally taking pictures of every single pole. That thing doesn't compress for beans, right? So those backups are ridiculously large. And if you get a second photo of the same pole, guess what? It doesn't say, well, those wood strands are similar and we're going to dedupe that. There's none of that. It's nothing. Now, you're a law firm that writes briefs and does a lot of copy and pasting, right? And you use the word affidavit a lot. All of a sudden, that compression in the deduplication becomes mammoth. So there really is not a rule of thumb. Tom, I'll defer if you've got one that you tell people, but it's always tricky. I always have to analyze the type of data they have to determine how much space they're going to need. So you have 10 terabytes. Do you need 10 terabytes of backup? Maybe. Do you only need 6 because we can dedupe and we're not deduping in that situation? Could be. Or do you have 10 terabytes that are already deduped and you want to keep a year's worth of history? Do I need 100 terabytes then? Like that starts getting a little funky too, because we didn't talk at all about how many backups we want to keep, right? How far do we want to keep it? What's your data retention policy? How long do you have to keep all of these backups? These are all things that you have to consider when you're putting in your backup strategy.
Well,
We need,
Brian, you
okay,
alluded.
this is the first of 5 parts.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
Brian alluded to it, but it really is, and you had the right phrase for it. But what is your acceptable downtime? Let's just say the most catastrophic thing happened, and we got to go full restore, bare metal. How long can you be down? And then you develop that strategy as Brian described, right? We may not do a full backup. Then you're going to get some incrementals, and then you want to keep them a while. I mean, the number of times that somebody will call and say, "Oh, my God, please tell me you have a backup from before September 8th. And
Yeah,
uh,
of
I
2019,
mean,
please.
those are all the things that Brian's talking about, and they're real and they happen
Yeah.
more often than you'd like to think.
Well, yeah. So there's RTO, recovery time objective, and then there's RPO, your recovery point objective. Differences between the two, but this is all part of that conversation. Like, so we have historical data. Well, the historical data is in the past. It's not going to change. I want it backed up, but it doesn't have to be backed up as part of my daily backups. So I feel like there's a science to it. But
Yeah.
Brian,
I think it's an art and a science, right? Like that's this
yeah,
is the beauty of when art and science collide, because it's sort of an
yeah.
art form to be able to figure out how we do the dance of this historical data that nobody needs, but if I take it away, suddenly everybody can't find what they need, right? And it's understanding where your data goes and where it belongs. So you're in a giant company that's got 70, 80, 90 servers. When we talk about this RTO and RPO, we can't talk about the company. We have to talk about every process in the company, what those require, then figure out what servers those map to, so that we can then turn around and say, okay, if the production floor can only be down for X, what does it take to make the production floor go? And we ask every department, what's the amount of time you could be down? Because let's be honest, the for all the accountants that are going to get on this thing, the accounting department can be down for a while, right? Like they may not think so, but they definitely can
Ooh,
be, right?
God,
Because
you heartless.
yep, I'm absolutely heartless, but they absolutely can
Yeah.
be down because you can just still send the bills out tomorrow. It'll be fine. Like we'll get to the other side of this thing if we're talking manufacturing or production or something like that. If we're in a high delivery, whatever, we've got to make sure that goods are still moving. So if we can't make parts and we have to fill orders, and the only way we get paid is by making parts and filling orders, those systems are going to be the most important, and they're going to be graded as such, and that's how we're going to start calculating out this plan. What is super interesting about that little fact there, and why I said it that way on purpose, is if we might have a plan that says production is more important than shipping, because we're in a mode where we're real time orders, we're trying to do things right away. But if production is somehow ahead, when we sit down and do our actual disaster recovery, you might turn the thing and say, I know we said production was the most important, but we have all this product we need to ship. And if the EDI doesn't make it out by this time, we've got giant penalties. So we want to focus all our area on that. Let's get the product we already have made shipped with the EDI working, and then pivot to getting the systems up. So we may change course based on the way the wind is blowing that day and what you've been able to do. So it's really easy if you have one server and you do one thing, because we got to get that thing back up. I can ask you, Tom, how long can your business be down? And you're like, Brian, it can't be more than an hour. Well, then dang it, we're going to have backups that run every 20 minutes. They're running to this other system. That system can boot within 30 minutes. And within 1 hour, I can have you back to 20 minutes ago, and we're all set and we shake hands. And that's real easy. That's one system. Now I have 70 independent systems that all interact with each other that are going across the globe. All of a sudden, that math becomes a little more difficult, and we have to start breaking out the calculus to try to figure out what that's going to be.
And the other part of your calculus, and I hate to keep going back to this, but these ransomware people are so tricky. Your infiltration point is likely long before you recognize the issue. And so you got to work through a series, right? Am I saying that
No,
right?
you're 100% right.
But,
You are.
but you don't know exactly. You figure it out after there's some steps, but you think, oh, I'm going to restore to yesterday. Yeah, probably not.
Right. Well, yeah. And how do you unwind that? So there are things you can try to put into place, and none of them are perfect, right? But we do specifically leverage backups that are in there looking for ransomware or potential ransomware and scanning for them every time it writes to the cloud. So it's trying to go back and looking for things that may have changed and alerting you to points that you may want to dive into deeper. So these things exist. They're not perfect, but they're getting there. And of course, once they get all the way there, the bad guys will figure out another thing, and we'll just keep playing this game of cat and mouse. Um, but that absolutely becomes the next level is where you're taking your backups and you're checking them to see, is there anything, not that ransomware is fired, but is there anything in here that looks like it could be? Because if it's laying in wait, we might be able to roll back to an hour before it happened, but we have to stop the detonation of the thing that's happening. So we've got this, we got to bring it up in a vacuum, go in, pull out the charge. It's like you're literally turning back time to try to make that happen. That's all great if you have one server. If this is across 70 servers, that ain't going to take 10 minutes. Was it Lufthansa just had the big, none of their planes could go? And it wasn't a ransomware in their case, but like they had a computer system failure. They were restoring and they were a day and a half, right? At Southwest, what was that? 2 days of no flights in the air?
How do you test this? I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, my backup software will spin up the server it's replicating just to make sure that there's a heartbeat there and it's active. But a true test is saying, okay, look, we're going to run our business on our backup infrastructure and see if things go swimmingly well.
Yeah.
That just seems like a gargantuan effort, especially if you're a 24/7 shop.
It, it,
But it does speak to, again, the importance of this, right?
it's super important. So let me just real quickly talk about that tabletop though. So that tabletop you're talking about where we're going to try to take something from end to end, it's real easy in a dentist's office. Hey, nobody's going to do anything. We're going to boot it over here. We're going to see if our patients are there. Can we make an appointment? Can we print out a schedule? We could. We shut it back down. Dentist office goes back to normal, right? Very easy. Now we're a 24/7 manufacturing shop and we want to be able to test this thing end to end. I won't say it's impossible, but it's pretty near impossible to test it end from end in one shot. What is more likely that happens is we shut down a department at a time and we test each piece of the infrastructure. Hey, we brought up this part where they're pulling orders, et cetera, et cetera. That all worked. Okay, they're good. Now we're going to get with the accounting folks. We're going to bring up the accounting system in the backup area. Let's make sure that all worked. And we're going to take some assumptions, but they're very educated assumptions that if this piece worked and this piece worked, they probably would work together because they're on the same infrastructure. I have no reason to think that they would not, given what's happening. And we just keep walking down the line to test each section. The other option is to say we're shutting down business for 12 hours and we're going to do a full end-to-end test. And there's going to be somebody standing out in the warehouse with a scan gun, and we're going to scan an item and we're going to walk it all the way through. But you're probably talking in a company of that magnitude, it could be 12 hours.
So for 100 companies, how many even take it to that level? Like how
I have done that 3 times ever with
in
where it's
your
big.
50 years on this
Right,
planet?
with
Yeah.
my 5,000 years of doing this, I've done it 3 times that way. Now, what I do every single year with all of my clients is I boot all of their servers in the cloud, and we do a dry run only in the cloud. We just don't attach it. We don't nail up the piece that goes back to their business or presents itself to the internet. So you feel pretty good about that exercise. It's still not all the way because we didn't test it. Like somebody didn't put an order in on the website because we're not presenting it to because we can't be in 2 places, right? Got all these reasons why the DNS can't point at 2 places at the same time. The rules of the internet exist. So that is the best way I know how to do it, is to take the whole infrastructure and boot it in the cloud and be able to log in, change a password, make sure that change saved, go over here, open a file, open up Great Plains, open up CRM, open up whatever, open up your softwares and just make sure all of the things work within that constraint. And then we say, okay, we're good.
Because there are pointers too, right? If you're used to, that's where again, that's probably for part 7 of 8 on this topic, where how your organization is addressed to the outside world and internally. And if you're going to spin up your organization out in the cloud, how does that all just neatly work? It just feels very complex.
But it's not, because we boot it within its own container in the cloud. So we're booting all of that is still addressed in the cloud. Where it gets tricky is the second I say present to the world, right? Once I do that, then I have to turn the stuff off on-prem because I can't be presenting to the world in 2 places.
Tom, you heard this, right? He said this is super easy.
I got
We can spawn our own ransomware attack, and he's going to save our
a month, and we'll set you all up. I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly what it
That's
is.
good.
Earl Scheib. Right? No problem.
Thanks again for tuning in. Join us next time when we cover change management and how important that is to the projects you're undertaking, user adoption, acquisition onboarding, and a host of other subject areas. Thanks.
Have a good.
Thanks for having me, guys. Bye.
Please join us next time when we'll
This is good for the outtake reel. I'm fine with it.
That's right.
cover user adoption, empathy, just a range of topics around that topic. Redundant as all hell. I need to look right there, not here. There. This whole lens thing throws me. Next time I'll get it right. Or I'm full of shit. Maybe this is just how it goes. Look, thank you for tolerating us. Good night.